Hello, I'm Bret Moss, and you're watching The Defining Moment for Creating the Culture of Conscience. Our guest today is Mr. Jeff Griffin. Jeff Griffin is Executive Director of the Citizens Commission on Human Rights for the Western United States. Mr. Griffin has a bachelor's degree in religion from Campbell University in Eastern North Carolina and a bachelor's degree in church music from Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in Fort Worth, Texas. Jeff is originally from North Carolina and has been living here in Southern California for the past 5 years. He's married and has 7 children. Jeff Griffin, welcome to The Defining Moment. Thank you so much for being our guest today.
Thank you for having me.
We're really happy you're here. Thanks.
Thank you.
Our topic today is the drugging of children. And I'd like to ask you to begin by sharing with our viewers a defining moment from your life which opened your eyes to the abuses being committed against children in the name of psychiatry.
It came when I was doing a television show in Tampa, Florida, much as you're doing. And I had come to know that I wanted to work with the Citizens Commission on Human Rights, but I thought I would do it on my terms. You know, I'll just be the host of a television show. And after about 3-4 weeks of this, the office would get my guests for me and call me and tell me, this is your guest. And so I was ready to go on the show. I had a basic background of what was going on with them. And we'd just sit there and have a good conversation there in the living room on the stage, there in the studio. And they called me one day and said, Jeff, we've got a very interesting show for you this Friday night. We were doing a live TV show, incidentally. And the couple are an elderly couple. They're in their 70s, and they got ensnared with Charter Hospital. Now, Charter Hospital, since we put out of business since that time, but Charter Behavioral Services or something like that it was at that time, very criminal. They were really taking advantage of the money lines. And they had pipelines coming in from everywhere. But anyway, we're sitting on the show, and I'm talking to this couple. He's in his early 70s, and she's right behind him. They're sitting to my left as we're facing the cameras talking, and all of a sudden he drops this phrase on me. He says, yes, because of the Baker Act. Well, now, just to tell your listeners quickly, the Baker Act is the law in the state of Florida that defines that a psychiatrist or anyone else can have you held in a psychiatric institution, locked up against your will, for up to 72 hours. We have one of those laws on the books in every state in the United States. It's called the Baker Act in Florida. In California, it's the 5150. I didn't know what the Baker Act was. Well, now, I can't sit there as host of this television show and say, well, I don't know. I never heard this here Baker Act before. I had to be a little, you know, have a little more couth than that. So I just said, well, now, would you explain for our viewers what the Baker Act is? And after I got my chin off the floor, we continued with the show. I went back to the office the next day, and I said, do you guys have a copy of the Baker Act? Oh, yeah, Jeff. And they reached around to a file cabinet, pull it out, hand it to me. And so I take it home and start reading it. And that was the moment, or that period right there, is the time when I changed from just being Jeff Griffin out here in the world, handling life, trying to improve conditions in life for everyone, to what we call Psych Buster. Because as I did my research, I found the data that I just shared with everyone on the camera. That is, every state in the United States back in the 1950s passed a 72-hour involuntary commitment law. And every person in this studio, all of the production people involved, I could walk out the door after we finish here and call the police and tell them I was threatened and make up all kinds of stories about you guys. And you would have a psychiatric emergency team in this studio, and they would be questioning you. And if you happen to answer incorrectly any question, you'd be locked up in an ambulance and taken to a facility for 72 hours against your will. That's the societal scene that we have grown accustomed to, is not even a fair word, but that we're in and don't even realize. That's how deadly it has become. And for children, oh my gosh, I mean, we can go a long time on that subject because of what's happening there. But for me, when I saw that there was this group that had power and sway over thee and me, I just went, this has got to change. And so for the last 15, 16 years, this is where my attention has been.
Okay, very clear. Thank you very much for sharing that. Appreciate it. About what percentage of children today in America are taking psychiatric drugs to treat behavioral problems?
I can't answer that question on a percentage basis because I've never worked it out from that point of view. I can give you a numerical figure.
Sure.
Over 9 million kids in the United States are on some type of psychotropic or neuroleptic drug that is supposedly for behavioral problems.
Okay.
All right. So when you look at it from that point of view, and then look at what that has caused in the past, you understand that we're looking at about 9 million time bombs just waiting to explode. Now let me back up and explain to you why I say that.
Yes, please.
All right. Every single mass murder, shooting, etc., that has occurred in our school system over the last 15 years that we have investigated, where we were able to get to the medical records, we found proof that a psychiatric drug and or psychiatric treatment was involved with that particular individual. One for one. There were 5 cases that we could not get the medical records on. And one of the reasons for that is apparently the pharmacological industry got there before us and sealed that, got the parents to seal that. If you've sealed my medical records, there's something you're hiding, baby. So, I could almost say 1 for 1, but we do know that out of the 15, 5 we don't know for sure. But we have a strong suspicion, and we have gotten data from other areas to indicate this. And this goes right on through the 3 shootings that occurred back here in September, late August, early September of 2006. The strings were pulled in practically every one of those. They found prescription antidepressants in the guy's car in Colorado. And I haven't heard the data on the fellow over in the area in Pennsylvania, but I do know that at the same time there was 3 there in about a 12-day period, and the kid that was involved in it was in the hands of psychiatry or on their drugs and labeled.
Okay, very clear. Thank you. When did the practice of resorting to psychiatric drugs for controlling the behavior of young people become a widespread practice in this country?
This started back in the 1980s. As relates to Ritalin itself, and it was the first drug that was created to control, quote unquote, behavior. Now, it does control behavior. Bombshell that may be, it does control behavior. It is a chemical straitjacket. It dumbs down a child. There are studies that have been done, and the mass media has not yet put these out, that show that kids on these drugs actually deteriorate grade-wise. This is not broad data that's been put out because the pharmacological industry, a multi-billions dollar industry each year, the psychiatric industry, also multi-billions, don't want this data known. The 2 of them together would have a conniption fit if that data were put out, I'm sure, although things are beginning to turn and we're beginning to get media today that is telling more of the truth versus trying to put out the public relations viewpoint of a pharmacological industry. But the fact of the matter is, Ritalin is not the only drug anymore. There's a plethora of these drugs out. By just about every single manufacturer has put one out. Now, I have some booklets that have data as relates to these. Let me pull up one of them here.
Okay.
This is a booklet that talks about the attention deficit hyperactivity disorder drugs.
Yes.
And the warnings that have come out. In 2004, the FDA put a warning on the drug Strattera. Strattera, I believe, is manufactured by Eli Lilly. And it says, the labeling warns that severe liver damage may progress to liver failure, resulting in death or the need for a liver transplant, in a small percentage of patients. In June of 2005, Concerta, another one of these drugs, and other methylphenidate problems, and these are the methylphenidates are the speed products. Ritalin is speed. The Drug Enforcement Agency, DEA, puts it in the same category as cocaine and morphine and those drugs.
Really?
Yes. And cocaine, by the way, is a legal drug. It's illegal on the street. It's a legal drug that can be prescribed. And Ritalin is legally to be prescribed. But it has become the drug of choice on the street. And it's called kitty cocaine. It's a speed. And you can buy a tablet from me if I've got my prescription as a kid and I don't want to take them, and most kids don't, except at times. You can buy it from me for $10 a pop. It's a cheap high that you get. But Concerta, these other drugs, had this put on it: psychiatric events such as visual hallucinations, suicidal ideation, psychotic behavior, as well as aggression or violent behavior can occur. Then in September of 2005, they issued a public health advisory entitled Suicide Thinking in Children and Adolescents Being Treated with Strattera. And it goes on this until just last fall. The last stuff has come out, and I don't think it's going to be the very last, but they now have black box warnings on practically all of these drugs that they will cause suicidal ideation, can cause suicidal ideation or homicidal ideation, particularly upon withdrawal. So they're deadly. You know?
Okay, very clear. So what other ethical issues are associated with prescribing psychiatric drugs to children to modify their behavior?
As a religious person, and you are as well, we have to recognize that children are spiritual beings also.
Yes.
Just because we adults know it, those of us that do, and all the others should, that we are spiritual.
Yes.
There is a hereafter. And we say that it's not okay to take drugs. Why would we put our children on drugs? That in itself is the ethical issue,
yes.
Okay, alone.
Okay.
The fact that you would say to your child, it is okay to take this drug because it's legally prescribed, but it's not okay to take this drug, which is basically the same thing, because it is illegal on the streets. Doesn't make sense. You see, there's an incongruency involved.
Double standard.
Well, even worse than that. It's not ethical.
Right.
You know, it's just not ethical. So there's the real issue. And then when you look at what it really does, and we're talking about a chemical straitjacket, why would we want to do that to a child? These are some of the most creative people we have on this planet. Children, man, they can sit there and they have an imagination that they can dream up whatever, you know?
Yes.
And Ron Hubbard made the statement, a civilization is only as strong as its dreams. And its dreams are dreamed by artists. Well, children are the greatest artists we have. Why dumb them down?
Yeah.
That's the ethics.
Okay, very clear. You've mentioned some of the negative consequences. Are there other worrisome negative consequences associated with taking Ritalin or other drugs similar to Ritalin?
There are many. I'll mention one specifically, and several tests have been done recently. And what they have found is a large percentage of those who took these drugs, Ritalin, etc., as children, actually became users of the illegal drugs as adults. It sort of sets that stage. The body becomes accustomed to it, and actually, Ritalin is habit forming. And most of these things are methylphenidate. These are habit-forming drugs. So there are those aspects to it, that there are things that have ramifications many, many years down the road.
Long-lasting
Yes.
effects. Can you give us some examples of the worst abuses that you've come in contact with in terms of the drugging of children?
I'm not here to be a fear monger, if you will. The fact of the matter is, these are things that have occurred. I'm going to start with when I was living in Florida before I moved to California.
Okay.
There was a young man up in Portland, Oregon, who shot and killed his mother and his father and lived in the house that night, stayed in the house that night with the bodies there. The next morning went to school and shot 22 people, killed 2, wounded 22. 15 years old. His name is Kip Kinkle. His mother, whom he murdered, was my wife's best friend in high school.
Wow.
So there's a personal connection, you see, to this. But the fact of the matter is that Kip was on Ritalin and Prozac, had taken numerous drugs, and was in the hands of a therapist, quote unquote, receiving anger management courses. And these drove him around the bend. That's one. Let's bring it a little closer to home for people that would be viewing the show. Right here in Los Angeles, we have a major problem with Child Protective Services. We colloquially call it Child Destructive Services. But Child Protective Services kidnaps kids, and I use that honestly from my perspective. It's a God-given right to have children. It's not a God-given right to maltreat them, but let's teach the parents. Don't take the kids away just because the parents didn't do right by them at that moment or for that particular time, but that's what they do. Then once they take them away, as any kid would, the kid begins to act up 9 times out of 10 and becomes a bit obsessively, compulsively, behavior-wise, and is labeled OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, or ADHD. And the social worker takes him to the psych, and the psych writes out a prescription after 5 minutes and listening to the social worker and notes from school for a prescription that is Ritalin or Strattera or whatever they want to give them. They actually give them Paxil and some of the other things because they are depressed. Well, who wouldn't be depressed as a child if you were ripped off from your parents? You know, it's common sense. So it's a great feeder line. There was a mother who whipped her son. She may have been just a little bit too angry, but anyway, he got a bruise. Went to school the next day. The teacher found out about it, called CPS. CPS came and took that boy and 2 others away from her. And she began to follow, these are her words to me, she began to do exactly what CPS asked her to do, and then she realized after about 8 months or a year that CPS was not going to give her back her kids. And she went down the tubes. She actually went out on the street and began to use illegal drugs and prostituted herself. Being strong enough, she realized this was not correct, and she finally popped out of it and began to go back to CPS and began to try to recover her life and change things so she could get the kids back. But this time, all 3 of these boys that had been taken from her were in the hands of psychiatry on a plethora of psychiatric drugs. I mean, I've got the medical records in my office. I don't know, there was 2 or 3 for each kid. The oldest one at the age of 14 hung himself in a foster care home or facility out in Pasadena. There was a lawsuit over this. It hasn't yet settled that I know of. These are 2 examples that I've been very close to personally.
Yes. Of
children that were in the hands of psychiatry, taking their prescriptions, and it destroyed their lives and destroyed the lives of many others as a result of it.
What are the alternatives to dealing with these so-called behavioral problems?
Number 1, don't go to a pro-psychiatric psychological terminal for help. They have one solution, and we've already discussed that.
Okay, that's the first recommendation.
Don't. The second thing is find someone who knows and understands the body and nutrition and have that thoroughly checked. And generally, a proper practitioner in the medical profession will do physical tests because there can be a physical underlying illness that will cause this behavior. Now, nutrition is the biggest cause. And from the day a kid's born, he's given sucrose, sugar. And we know, we've heard, it's a known fact, if parents will recognize it and admit to it, they've heard it, that it'll cause a child to be hyperactive.
Yes. It's a well-known fact.
You and I know it, and our groups know it for sure. But there are parents who don't follow that. And there are practitioners out there who recognize that and can help change that. A study was done by a PhD out of Cal State University just a few years back that went to juvenile halls and to schools here in California, and found that something like half, 48% of the kids, that they changed the diet of and began to give them more fruits and nuts and bran, if you will, the grains. 48% of them changed their behavior. And in the school system itself, I think it was something like 16 to 20% of them began to increase their study or their grades just by changing the diet.
Yeah.
Marianne Block, who is a doctor in Texas, wrote a book, No More ADHD. And she herself finds that diet is the key to handling this. So these are alternatives, and these are things that every parent should look into. This booklet is a dynamite piece of information because it tells the story in such a way that a parent going through it can go, uh-oh, and maybe see how they can recognize problems for themselves.
Okay, and you'd like to
then
tell...
gives them the alternative
how
to
can
it.
our viewers get a hold of a booklet like that?
They can call me if they'd like.
Okay.
At 800-942-2247.
All right.
And that's 800-942-2247. And we can get this to them. A donation of $5 would be appreciated.
Okay, so that's the telephone number for the Citizens Commission on Human Rights.
That is correct. Of Los Angeles, here in LA.
Angeles.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes. But it's interesting looking at when you get to the back 2 pages. In addition to this, there is a section here that says what parents can do. In addition to just looking for doctors that are going to give them a proper diagnosis. Number one is educate themselves. And this is something that is very, very important. They need to ensure that they're getting all of the information as relates to whatever it is they've been told is going on with their child. School teachers, bless their souls, have been totally infiltrated by the industry.
The psychiatric industry.
Absolutely. And as a result, they have been trained to look for the problems, the symptoms, if you will, and psychiatry is based on symptomatology. There's nothing scientific about it. There's not a single medical test, scientific test that they are required to use in order to give a diagnosis. There is no CAT scan, MRI, X-ray, blood test, urine test, anything that can back up and prove what they say. It's all opinion. And as a result, the only thing they know to do is to give drugs and ultimately shock you and so forth to cover up their lack of knowledge about the mind. So educate yourself to this. There's a wealth of data on the internet. Another thing that they can do, we've already talked about, and that is get the child thoroughly checked out from a medical practitioner.
Yes.
But the last thing is very, very important that it talks about here, and that's this. Speak out. Talk to people about this. Do not accept a viewpoint of someone that you consider to be an authority who is just trained in data that's actually false. There are 2 laws being proposed in California, and we'll hear a little more about it as the months go by. One of them is to ensure that no school personnel in the state of California will ever be able to tell you, me, or any other parent or grandparent that they have to take these drugs or else. They cannot be coerced into doing this. Most parents who have put their child on these things have gone, I don't want to do this. I didn't want to do this.
Right.
In fact, if you read these stories in this booklet, you're going to find these parents are going, I didn't realize I had a choice and I was coerced. And this law is going to change that. You cannot force me to put my child on this drug. And by the way, the definition of euphemism basically is a good word to talk about something bad. All right? The euphemism for these things is medicine. Ain't medicine, babe, it's drugs. So, you know, you got to call a spade if it's a spade.
The Citizens Commission on Human Rights has also been very active in bringing new legislation onto the books and even in causing people to be arrested and put in jail for there are abuses in the psychiatric industry?
We were founded 37, 38 years ago, specifically to investigate and expose the abuses in this industry. And in those ensuing 38 years, we have many stacks of documents that document exactly everything that I have said here on this show, plus. I mean, it's amazing what we've been able to put together. And yes, there are hundreds of these guys now that are looking out from the vertical metal bars. Because of our activity and our work, we're over 300 chapters strong now around the planet. We are the largest watchdog committee looking into psychiatry and its abuses. We have now gotten the ear of many legislators in many legislations around the planet, not just here in the United States, although you and I tend to have a focus here, which is fine because this happens to be the largest concentration of psychiatry of any country on the planet.
That doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, well, it's money. It's interesting. They don't go to a third world country that has no money.
Yeah.
You will not find them there. But we work very diligently in this area. We work very closely with legislators who have seen the light and who actually recognize that there is a true cause of every problem we have in society today and where that cause comes from. And we are very active on a state level as well as a federal level across our organizational lines. We pass information back and forth between each other specifically to be used. We have allies that just run the gamut. The NAACP now is pushing 2 laws in California that we're backing. The American Family Rights Association, which for years has been fighting the Child Protective Services misgame, trying to get some help and hasn't, is with us now. There are websites everywhere, Fight for Kids, Able Child, that a person can go to. These are not us, but these are people who recognize that we have the truth and want to work with us because they know we now have a little bit of altitude. And they're willing to throw in their ship with our flotilla and let's go get them.
Okay, great. Well, on that note, Jeff, it's really been a pleasure to have you here on today's show. Thank you so much for being our guest on The Defining Moment.
Thank you for allowing me to be here.
My pleasure. Thank you. You've been watching The Defining Moment for Creating a Culture of Conscience. You can find us on the internet at www.definingmoment.tv. Thanks for watching and have a great day.